Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Whatever time you happen to be watching this, I hope you're having a wonderful day. This presentation is about the connection paper. The connection paper is going to ask you to connect the many deaths of Layla Starr with works that you have read and discussed in one of your philosophy classes or one of your theology classes or one of your um, in your BLI section. As always, for all the YouTube bots, the borrowed images and quoted text are used for educational purposes. This video is not monetized, and I am just trying to provide something for my Mount Marty students who can't be in class. Let's take a look at the specifics of the paper. As I said, it's Connect the Many Deaths of Layla Starr to readings in your philosophy, BLI, or theology class. I believe that most of you are freshmen, and therefore the BLI class should be perfect. However, if you are an upperclassman, you should be in a philosophy or theology class. I think almost all of you would be. Please have, use the works in one of those classes and try to make connections there. The idea that we have the many deaths of Layla Starr indicates that death will certainly be the subject, and certainly many deaths imply many lives. The relationship between life and death is something that religion and philosophy seems to delight in studying. Paper should be 3 to 5 pages. Because of the length of time we're spending on this, I'm going to be pushing for the longer end, as long as, once again, we are doing it concisely, cogently, and we are completing the ideas we need to. Include a minimum of 2 direct quotations from the many deaths of Layla Starr. These quotations should be from 2 different chapters or issues of the graphic novel. I'm using the term graphic novel here, even though it probably should be called a collected edition. However, Ram V, it seems to me, had one story in mind. He spread that story out over 5 issues. Those 5 single issues were then collected into the book that you've been assigned for class. So, graphic novel, I think, works. Nobody argues about whether Great Expectations is a novel or a collected edition, even though parts of it were released in a serial fashion in the 1800s. That digression aside, one other point: because art is central to a comic, one quotation can be a reference to details in the specific panel. As I go through my sample, I'll try to point out a place where the specific panel, the art in the panel, can be used as a quote unquote scare quotey quotation. A minimum of 2 direct quotations from readings done in your philosophy, BLI, or theology class. I reserve the right to double check with your professor to confirm the reading was actually done for the class. And I guess I reserve the right to refer to myself in a third person too. I'm going to have to work on that. You need to explain how the quotations connect. That's the focus of the paper. How do those quotations connect? Comics are an underappreciated art form. But I do believe that they frequently introduce philosophical or theological ideas. Again, later on in this presentation, you are going to see a comic book character praise the virtues of philosophy. And I believe that taking a look at how what some might call lowbrow culture interacts with highbrow, deep thought is an important part of putting a well balanced life together. Obviously, the thinkers you're reading in your classes have to take the discussion about life and death, about friendship, about whether it's advisable to have eternal life. Any of those things to a much deeper level than Ram V is going to get to in a thin book where the words have to give way to the pictures. So when you're doing that, that has to be part of your discussion, part of your analysis. What's the depth? What's the nuance that an Augustine or an Aquinas or a Hume or a Wittgenstein or a whomever has that Ram V can only begin? In addition to starting points that are further developed in the philosophical or theological work, the connections for this assignment, they can be some comparisons, they can be some contrasts. If somehow or another there's an allusion to the falling apart of the industrial belt in the United States, and there's some of that in the Ram V book, that's all fair game. The starting points are there in the Ram V book. Take them whatever direction the thinkers you read in your theology and philosophy classes. Go for the depth there. But just how can we connect these two things? As always, explain, explain, and then explain some more. Don't repeat your point, but develop the explanation. Take it one level deeper, and then take it another level deeper. How and why are always going to be more important than who or what. A few more specifics here. Don't try to take the easy way out. This book is not a defense of polytheism. It's not a defense of the Hindu pantheon. Ram V really is taking some liberties with the Hindu pantheon as he puts them in the business environment that he does at the start of the book. So monotheism and polytheism aren't going to be the issue here. So don't try to take the easy way out by saying, oh, Hindus believe in a bunch of gods, Christians believe in one, here's my paper. That's not the depth of Ram V's point, and your thinkers, I think, can deal with the subjects Ram V deals with other than, the triune God versus a pantheon. The same point about reincarnation versus the idea of it's appointed unto man once to die, after that the judgment. If the many deaths of Layla Starr were seriously about reincarnation, she wouldn't come back as Layla Starr each and every time. And finally, let's not do the if one could go back in time and kill baby Hitler, should they question. Kali does attempt to end baby Darius's life at birth, but that's a minor part of the book. And the discussion of should we go back in time rarely provides moral clarity. It is best done, I think, as a dorm argument late at night when you have nothing else to talk about. And I think by the way, you should always have something other to talk about. The specifics. The many deaths of Layla Starr, we're going to talk about it from the 21st through March 3rd. We're going to have conferences March 12th, 13th, 14th, 15th, and 18th. The connection paper is going to be due March 22nd. You have almost a month. In between March 3rd and March 12th, when conferences start, we have spring break. So you have plenty of time to think through which idea, which thinker, what points about life and death, or friendship, or love, or whatever all else we think we find in the many deaths of Layla Starr. What points about that are made by your thinkers and developed by your thinkers, and you want to talk about this thinker and the many deaths of Layla Starr. As I said earlier, I'm going to try to talk about why bother. And I have a comic book character. In this case, the comic book character is called The Question. Her civilian name is Renee Montoya. And she, as The Question, offers the belief that philosophy, although it's the college major everyone loves to make fun of, is the fundamental underpinning of every aspect of society. Every belief system we have, whether it's political, religious, a business belief system, some personal belief system about how we should treat our fellow man or fellow woman, is built upon a philosophy that we have put together and do our best to adhere to. If one masters philosophy, one masters life. I think that that is absolutely true. She makes a point in the second column about the more complicated the question, the more complex the answer. I'm going to digress for a second and remind you that your job as a communicator, your job as a writer, is to take the complicated, to take the complex, and to make it comprehensible. And so please, as you're working on this, don't try to be complicated just for the sake of being complicated. You have to make this connection comprehensible and clear to your reader. On the next slide, I'll talk for a bit while you take some seconds to read here. I don't want you to necessarily become the question. And I certainly don't want you to become a comic book character wearing a fedora and a mask that makes your face look blank. I think all the professors in the world have had way too many situations where they have looked out and saw a sea of blank faces. But I do want you to think about the idea of, for this paper, taking a deep dive into one of the thinkers and into the idea of life and death, love and hate, whatever it might be, that the Many Deaths of Layla Starr starts, and ask yourself a lot of questions. Don't become the question, but become the questioner. Ask how, ask why, and keep digging deeper. Why does this matter? Why should anybody care? Why is the pop culture book dealing with this question? Why is the philosopher making the point he or she is making? Again, I don't want you to become the comic book character. I don't want you to become the question, but I certainly want you to become a questioner. I do want you to take a deep dive into this one. Next, for me, one of the questions I always ask, or I've always asked myself, at least the past 30 years, is how do ideas gain traction? When I was younger, it seemed to me that the ideas came top down. They came from a think tank, they came from some book written by a college professor, and they trickled down through college classes, through newspaper reports, into eventually high school classrooms, and then they kind of became part of the culture. But the older I'm getting, the more I realize that it seems that ever so often we have populist moments. We may well be living in a populist moment now. And that populist moment coalesces and ideas go from the bottom up, not top down necessarily, but the bottom up. And I'm not sure that they meet in the middle. If they meet, they either meet at the top and get argued out, or they get argued out at the bottom and changed, and then once again try to get pushed up to the top. And the comic book, I think, is a unique way to do that. On my disclaimer slide, I've had this photo or this picture for a long time. But you have the top down with Thor, the god on Asgard, using King James English, versus the Thing from Yancey Street, dropping the G's. Right back at ya, not right back at you. The lower class guy who became a pilot and became this thing by accident versus the god who was the god by birth. How do ideas gain traction? Top down, bottom up. And I think looking at a comic book and the ideas that are in a comic book are a way to wonder, can some of these ideas that he presents move up, or is he just reflecting ideas that came from the top down? Let's take a look at a sample. Part 1, Once Upon a Falling Star, makes some observations about the human body. As a quick reminder, the sample I have has 4 quotations, but for the paper they would count as 1 because they come from part 1 of the book. So please remember you have to have things from 2 parts of the book. These 2 panels set up the dichotomy. Top panel. There's a world of extraordinary possibilities, an extraordinary life that the human body will give death because she has been fired. And she is now no longer needed. She's no longer going to be a god, but she has this chance for an extraordinary life. On the other hand, she's aware that she's going to grow old. She's going to have aches and pains. She's going to have a terrible ailment in her old age. And she is going to be broken and smelly and ill. And she's not going to be perfect. She is going to let down people who believe in her, and people she believes in are going to let her down. In other words, there's an extraordinary life, and there's also a lot of pain. There's that dichotomy. And it seems to be put together in this idea of the body. The body is the place where all of this is going to happen, aches and pains, and mortal life, because the death will be the death of the body. As I continue through the body, we take it from the physical to the spiritual and the moral. The top panel is all physical and all about the limitations. She is running and she is finding herself out of breath, and she hurts. The effort is causing pain. There are tons of physical limitations here. The bottom 2 panels, I think the picture shows that there's something unique about the physical body. She is there to kill baby Darius because baby Darius is the thing that is going to invent eternal life and put her out of business. And yes, a few panels earlier, she knows his name and that bothers her. But just looking at the art in this panel, she can't kill the baby, in part because of her body and the fact that she shares a body with, or that the human body that Darius possesses shares the qualities that she has. The little ghost that you'll read about, or have read about, I hope, talks about when you're a god, things are easy because it's always from a distance. But when you're mortal, there's a moment when you're up close with other mortals. There's a moment when death is a far different thing, and it becomes a more spiritual thing, a thing that has this moment of grace with it, which makes it sad, but it's also not easy. It's spiritual, not just physical. My thinker is a guy named Terry Eagleton, and it's from the book After Theory, page 156. It is because of the body, not in the first place because of Enlightenment abstraction, that we can speak of morality as being universal. The material body is what we share most significantly with the whole of the rest of our species. extended both in time and space. Of course, it is true that our needs, desires, and sufferings are always culturally specific, but our material bodies are such that they are, indeed must be, in principle capable of feeling compassion for any others of their kind. It is on this capacity for fellow feeling that our moral values are founded, and this is based in turn on our material dependency on each other. I don't know what your philosophy professors, theology professors will think of this. I picked this quotation in part because it's not one that I'm almost positive it's not one that you have dealt with in class. But let's take a look at Eagleton and Ram V. All humans have bodies. All human bodies share frailties. I think the Ram V panels and Eagleton talking about sufferings, whether they're culturally specific or not, make the same point. Further, Eagleton is more specific, but I think Ram V in that panel where she can't do it, she has compassion for baby Darius, even though he has made her immortal. He has taken her out of the pantheon. The fact that she now shares a body, or she has a body, and she shares the frailties of breathing and flesh and blood with Darius, creates a sense of compassion. Eagleton says that that's one of the things that's central to morality and compassion is our human body. That too can be a connection that can be developed in the paper. Eagleton talks about spread over time and space. Being spread over time and space makes it sort of universal, makes it perhaps even makes it, eternal. And grace and morality, and again, the physical form and knowing the name are significant. The art can be part of the analysis. I think a side question is look at context. Does either writer follow up on this point as we continue through the many deaths of Layla Starr or after theory? Is there a way to link grace and morality, or is grace somehow a more spiritual thing and morality is a more physical thing? Is one theological and one practical? All of those things, I think, might be something to look at. It might be a connection that leads to a contrast. And again, contrast can be a connection in some ways for the purposes of this paper. And as I mentioned earlier, I got ahead of myself. Both authors hint at something eternal. It doesn't seem central to their claims about the human body, however. And again, go back, look at the context, go beyond the quote. Remember, you have a second section from the Ram V book. You have a second quotation from Eagleton, or I have a second quotation from Eagleton if it's my paper. And let's wrap it up. I have to go through and find other quotations about the importance of the body from the many deaths of Layla Starr. I have to find another quotation from Eagleton. I can probably find another philosopher as well to talk about points with the universal nature. If I go to another philosopher, that philosopher must agree with Eagleton. I can't have a contrast between philosophers. You can't have a contrast between philosophers. If you're reading a collection, an anthology, that takes two or three philosophical points or two or three theologians and puts them in a book. Talk to your professors as needed. I'm going to be either brave or stupid and let them see this presentation. I've already warned them that students may come and talk to them. You can come talk to me during conferences, obviously. I will be happy to commit philosophy without a license or theology without a license. Then write the paper that makes the connections clear. I hope the sample has been somewhat useful. A quick reminder, just because I worry and am paranoid. Your paper doesn't have to be about the body. The body is central, I think, to the first part of the Many Deaths of Layla Starr. The body is central to a lot of philosophers and theologians. You don't have to write about the body. I'm going to be going through a lot of things in the comic. I think there'll be plenty of things to write about besides the body. If you want to, that's fine, but remember, you're not going to be using Eagleton. You're going to be using a theologian or a philosopher that comes from one of your classes. And finally, just to use the comic book creator here for a second, good and interesting art doesn't want to give you the answer. It wants to make you ask many questions. That's what I want this paper to do. Ask a lot of questions. How does it connect? Why does it connect? Why does Rom V have this statement, this plot detail? Why is the art this way in the book? Why does Aquinas make the points he makes in connection to life and death? Or why does Augustine, or why do any of the people you want to talk about make those points? I'm looking forward to this paper. Ask the questions. Dig as deep as you possibly can. Hope to see you in the next class period. Hope all of you have a good day.